welcome to today's episode of Sofa Chats with the Muslim Institute. My name is Samia Rahman. Today we're very happy to have with us Mothiur Rahman. Mothiur is a lawyer setting up a legal innovation lab called New Economy Law and the initiator of the Muslim chapter of the Extinction Rebellion movement.
Yes.
So Mothiur, thank you so much for joining us on the sofa. I'm really interested to hear more about the Extinction Rebellion movement that you're involved in. Would you mind telling me a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's been lots of media attention around Extinction Rebellion, and it's just sort of grown very quickly. My experience of it was, well, I know Rising Up was a group that some of those people came up from the Occupy movement a number of years ago, and there's been a big sort of, desire to carry on that feeling of civic and community-led action for change. And as I understand it, there was a meeting in the summer to say that the government isn't doing enough around bringing to attention the crisis that we're approaching, and the urgency and the emergency that is needed, and the action is far too slow. And that coincided with one of the initiators who was doing a PhD, which was looking at around that many of the changes that we almost take for granted now, like rights for women and so on, came out of struggle, and that struggle was also connected to civil disobedience. And his expert sort of study showed that the kind of quantitative analysis of the amount of civil disobedience you need to get what's called an Overton window, which is what the government sees as politically tolerable to be speaking about, for that to widen sufficiently to bring in these kind of what is seen as radical and then become the norm.
Because this is the thing about the Extinction Rebellion movement. Its willingness to take on direct action to achieve its aims. So how's that manifesting itself?
Yeah, I mean, when I first heard about it through this movement through Larch, so I'm living in Larch Maxi, and his name was after a tree because he lived in a tree for a year, trying to prevent the trees being cut down for the M62 bypass, I think.
Oh yes.
A number of years ago, and he was living in a tree for a year, and he said his living in that tree for a year had changed the way that he related to nature, because he was actually in such close proximity. Anyway, I've been working with him through Frat Free Totnes and some other Frat Free groups with my legal work. And he mentioned just a few weeks ago, when Extinction Rebellion hadn't been in the media, like, I've just heard there's this movement, and I really feel it's like I've been looking for the right place where the values and the principles bring out something that he feels tangible and real, and with his values. And so because he mentioned it, I didn't know anything about it, but I felt trust to that. And then when he gave this first talk, he was explaining about the lack of urgency, and that people need to step up to this place of civil disobedience for the change. And I noticed inside myself that I was like, oh, there's that edge where you kind of think, oh, I'm used to just going that far, but not to actually...
But not to make yourself vulnerable and to put yourself really in a position where you might get arrested and compromise your future. That definitely, and also just the basic sense of trust in the government as well, because I work as a lawyer, as a public law lawyer. It's like, even underneath all the kind of campaigns and so on, there's a kind of basic sense that the government is working for the public interest. But just recently I've been sensing that that there feels like a division between the state's interests and the public interests, and it's just made that sort of sense, like, what is it that's not being said that needs to be said, and how can we go about saying it, and then am I willing to make that next step? And so I think it's been very clear in its need for people to step up, and people have been making that choice consciously, not like, oh, I just want to go and rebel. It's been a very much conscious choice by, for example, Erica, who's a grandmother in Nicole, saying, I can't live with myself knowing that if they are facing this urgency and I didn't do anything, and I'm willing now to step forward to that. So people are making this choice consciously. I was reading an article by George Monbiot. I mentioned it to you, and he's someone who's been a long time environmental activist and campaigner to draw attention to climate change and the sort of kind of apocalyptic sort of, you know, future that really we could possibly face. And he's extremely enthused by the Extinction Rebellion movement, because I think he was talking about the way in which there are so many young people who are involved, so many people who are willing to really effect change, you know, with whatever means available to them. And he really felt that this was, you know, something that they were on the cusp of something quite sort of monumental. I mean, do you really think that Extinction Rebellion can effect change?
Yeah, I mean, I was reading this book about black swan events and about how events, some can look insignificant, but they shift something in our consciousness or in the way that we see ourselves. And you could say, even though Occupy, you could say, some people say it didn't achieve anything, but I think it achieved so much in terms of how people then went out with that change, like myself, went out with a changed way of looking at the world, and that has moved things in how we engage, or how activists are engaging with a much wider, I think, branch of civil society. So it's not just activism, or it's trying to make it much more civil or civilian. Civilians are beginning to notice that they need to be involved as well, and to grassroots movements, and a lot of grassroots, and it's Occupy. The organisation level, I think, I've been just amazed at how well organised and how well it's following this kind of sense of complexity and allowing agency in groups to carry out. Because I know often some groups do talk about it, but it's quite hard to actually affect it and bring that kind of adaptation and complexity into the organisations. So I'm quite, so I'm impressed at that. And the articles I'm reading just shows that there's and being there as well shows the amount of people who are passing by who are supportive.
That's actually something that's quite interesting, because the criticism that's been levelled at the Extinction Rebellion movement is that, you know, that they're going about it the wrong way. They're sort of, you know, disrupting traffic. They're stopping people from, you know, going about their everyday business. So, for example, blockading a road so that, you know, like so people can't go about, you know, their business, making deliveries, taxi drivers picking people up, people going to work, causing kind of town centres to come to a standstill. Some people are saying all this is going to do is antagonise and alienate, but actually, do you think that it's actually a constructive way that you're getting the message through?
Definitely, I think it's been a really, I mean, that has been the intention, to compare the inconvenience that is happening, and you have to make a decision as to what kind of level of inconvenience, what is the urgency of the matter at hand, and how do we bring attention to it, and where's the priority, and there will be some people inconvenienced, and that is going to be.
So what do you say to them? You know, someone who's, you know, making a delivery. They've got a van full of goods, and you know, they're on a tight schedule, and they're making a delivery, and their manager is shouting at them because they're late. So you know, how do you sort of reconcile that kind of disruption to people's lives? You know, with, you know, how do you instill in them, you know, a sense of what you're trying to achieve?
Well, let's look at Preston New Road, where there's the fracking campaign to prevent the risk of fracking in that community. And 4 people, I don't know, recently stood on one of the lorries, and that lorry was there for 4 days, and then they were prosecuted for public nuisance, and they then were sentenced to 16 months in jail. You know, one was a person who's a teacher in. All of these are just people with a conscience and wanting to have their sense of their conscience, of that they don't feel able to. They need to bring their message forward. But that level of what that shows to me is that the government is threatening the liberties of protest to such an extent.
Yeah, people feel they have no other option.
No other option, and that level of trying to prevent what is the essence of democracy and freedom, shows that we need to step up also on the other side to say, no, we need to be able to show up if the government isn't fulfilling its obligations to its citizens by telling them what is actually at risk here. Then there needs to be a means by which we can do that, and because of the way everything is tied up, civil disobedience to this level
it seems
is the only way to do it, to bring it into that. This is only the first step of a strategy once the attention is being brought there. My desire was to get Muslims to be able to tell, or to collaborate, because I don't know enough about Islam and all its plural histories, and I'm trying to use, rather than talking about Islam as a thing, it's like there's a movement that needs to happen, and how do we articulate an understanding of Islam through the movement that is needed. And so I find, this practicing something alternative in order to divert the attention away from Islam is this or Islam is that. It might be more beneficial in a way.
Yeah. So facilitating the sort of the creation of a Muslim chapter, was that really about sort of engagement with the community, about sort of kind of inviting Muslims to recognise that this is an issue that they can take ownership over as well.
Yeah, not to be just defending themselves against the dominant sort of narrative.
This is really what sort of being inclusive, being an inclusive Muslim is all about. Sort of recognising the plurality of faith, but recognising the very different sort of ways in which people sort of be Muslim, so to speak. And I think the Threshold Society is is a place where you found your space. That's what makes you comfortable, alongside all the other different sort of sects and ways of practicing Islam that are out there. So Mothiur, what is the purpose? What is your kind of hope for the future in setting up this Muslim chapter of Extinction Rebellion?
Well, this came about because of a conversation with Gail, or email exchange with Gail Bradbrook, who was one of the initiators of Extinction Rebellion, and she told me there was a sisterhood group set up, and I said, oh, it would be great to have a brotherhood group because we needed men coming together to find a different identity for men that's much not the alt-right, but is focused on the positive values rather than these kind of shadow elements of aggression.
Does this tie into this a lot of talk of toxic masculinity and providing an alternative? And
providing an alternative that isn't the alt-right and isn't has less of the shadow elements, but has clarity and so that is one group that got set up. And then I thought, oh, why not? So I said, why not? Because I've been looking at Islam and thinking that this identity could have some space here. Why not set up Extinction Muslim Rebellion? And she was really excited about it. She said, yeah, let's do that. And I'll put it up. You put some words in, and then let's see where it goes. And so, and my intention behind it, and the aspiration was not for it to be just an enclosed group of a Muslim identity, but more like to help to use the Extinction Rebellion aims and think about what is a Muslim experience that can add something to the aims.
So the Muslim chapter is about really inviting and encouraging Muslim communities to be part of that conversation.
Yeah.
So the idea is so to mobilise them, to mobilise Muslim communities to be engaged in this movement.
This movement on two fronts, I guess, with the climate change front, but also, and then to the second front of how do we engage democratically, which needs people with alternative perspectives to be engaged in that.
I believe you've written some poems that sort of tie in your feelings about Islam, your reconnection, also your relationship with nature.
I mean, when you read like Rumi's poetry and so on, I've often felt it as a kind of a abstract sense, but as I've been working with the Mevlevi order, I see how it's so integral that the emotions that you feel get expressed in words or in music and so on, so it starts here inside and comes out. And so I was practicing with that, like, what is this feeling that I'm arising through Brexit and so on, and all these complex feelings around what's my identity, you know, being in between two worlds, what is this idea of the shadow, like, what can something be reborn through our grief, which is part of the Extinction Rebellion movement. So I wrote this poem called, which came out from this place. I'm going to call it Barots, because Barot was is the bigger word for the, so Barot's Song to the West. Your ancestors saw a bird and decided to dissect it, to understand it. You did not do it, but you are not free from it. My ancestors saw a bird swooping over the width of a wide river, singing songs ardent and sweet to the rice harvest rhythms. I do not feel it, but I am not free from it. Let my ancestors meet your ancestors in the love of that which is lost. And in the dark shadows of our longings, let our young walk again in balance and beauty.
So thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
No, it's been a real pleasure to get to meet you and to be able to have this opportunity.
Please remember to hit that red button below and to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, if you'd like to leave a comment below on any future topics you'd like us to discuss or any ideas you might have, go for it. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.